Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us at another one of these storyline workshops. Today, we're going to look at how to develop a specific interaction from a role-playing game. Now, I know a lot of us here, I think, are gamers just from seeing the kind of buzz on LinkedIn when I shared this. But role-playing games, generally, they start off where you choose a character. Your character has certain traits, and you can kind of customize those traits and those skills and those abilities to kind of get a very unique play style, a unique experience based on your play style, so to speak. So I've been wanting to do a kind of tutorial series or something like this for a while now, where we kind of try to recreate some of those elements in Storyline. Part of that is just because I've been a gamer since I was young, and I like those types of games, and I know that it's possible in Storyline. So part of it is kind of I want to do this just because it seems fun. But at the same time, it would bring us so deep into different things like variables, conditions, kind of complex triggers, and the like. So instead of committing to some 10-week create an RPG series, I figured we just do a session like this, see how people like it, and see if there's demand for another for us to continue this, because we could have a lot of fun with it. We could really plan out the story and over time make this a whole cohesive experience. But again, in this specific session, we're going to dive deep into how to build this character creator interaction. So again, you may be familiar with this if you've played these types of games, but when you pick a character, when you create a character, you generally can customize it in some ways. You can change, maybe you have 20 points and you have to assign them to different traits like strength and charisma and dexterity and so on and so forth. So you can, and each kind of trait will impact your gameplay in a different way. Maybe you won't be able to open something if your strength isn't high enough, but you can get really good deals at the merchant if your charisma is really high, for example. So to make this more learning and development focused, I was trying to think about the story behind this. How can we give this kind of a learning and development instructional design spin? And so just to talk about that a little bit, I'm imagining, so imagine we're a brand new instructional designer that just got hired at this global company, and we need to, I don't know if we want to give us a specific goal, we want to become the chief learning officer, or we just kind of leave it open world and we just do little quests, and the quest we take on, the quest, but really it might be helping different people or working on different projects around the office or for the company. And then how we do in those could impact our career trajectory. So you can see this could be a much bigger project than what we're going to do in this very specific session. But I do have some polls set up for us just to kind of see where we want to take this series, or if we want to kind of go a different direction with storyline content over the next few months. But I do have a poll for you all. I do want to see where everyone is at with storyline. So I am sharing a poll so I can get to know just what our experience level is. Because again, we will be using variables and conditions here, but it will not be a super complex application of those, I would say. For those of you who haven't used Storyline before, generally you're probably not diving in with variables and conditions on day one, but it will be good just to kind of see what we're doing with them, just to know that this functionality exists. Looks like most of us know the basics and are comfortable with most tasks, so that's good. If you are brand new, or either way, if you want to follow along, you can, and some of you will, but if you want to just kind of watch what we're doing, and then if you're intrigued or you want to challenge yourself, you could try to follow along with the recording, which will be on YouTube tomorrow. So don't feel pressure. If you get behind and you just want to soak it up, that's completely fine. All right, so I think we are ready to dive in. So I have Storyline open here. I get my chat in the other window. Yeah, open up Storyline if you do want to follow along. All right, so here we are in Storyline. So all I did is I created a new project. So that's what we're seeing here. And as usual, we will just double click on this slide to go into slide view. All right. So I'll scroll out so I can see the whole slide just by holding down the control key on my keyboard and then using the mouse wheel just to pull that out a little bit. And we have some housekeeping things to do, just like we do in every single one of these sessions. The first thing we'll want to do is change the aspect ratio to get that nice 16:9 widescreen aspect ratio. And we do this by going to the Design tab up here at the top. I also have this little feature, thanks to Kath Ellis. She showed me it, where I can kind of put a little highlighter over my mouse. So hopefully this will be easier to follow. So we go to the Design tab, and then we can go to the Story Size option here. And I just want to do a custom size. So I'm going to uncheck the lock aspect ratio button, and we're going to do 1280 by 720. Once that is set just like that, we'll press OK. And now you see we have this nice wide screen layout, which is exactly what we're going for. And we also want to remove the player. Again, if you've come to any of these storyline workshops, you know we do this every single time, but if we preview this right now, we can see it has the whole player around it with resources and next buttons and all of that. We don't need that right now or for this project, so we are going to remove it. So we can go to the Home tab, we can go to Player, and now you'll see Player Style, Modern, that's fine. Menus and Controls, we want to turn those off. And then I'll go to Colors and Effects and just change that to Light instead of Dark. And if you missed this step, it's not a huge deal. It's easy to figure this out, but we'll see if we preview it now. We should just have a completely blank slate. And we do. This is our project. So it's time for us to develop it out. Okay, so I'm just going to add a text box to the top of the screen, and I'll do that with Control T, and it will just create a text box right where my cursor is. If you're on a Mac, that should be Command T, or you can go to the Insert tab, select Text Box, and then click wherever you want it to go on the screen. So we will say, please, or I don't know if we need an instruction here. I'm just going to put like available points, okay? Because let's say we have 10 points that we need to put across multiple traits, all right? And again, if you're just joining, we're building this character creator. Maybe we're just creating a character from scratch, or like in some RPGs, it's like choose your character. So in our case, if we're doing this in an instructional design context, maybe we'll have like the super developer character. We can choose to be like the really techie person. Maybe we choose to be like the really charismatic, like networking person. And maybe if we were doing that side of this, and maybe at the end, if we have time, we can kind of do that. Maybe these different characters will have different like default values, and then we can do like further customization on this screen where we can change. Let's say we'll change charisma. That seems like a good one. We'll do technical skills. And what's another one? Maybe like, I don't know about our like focus, like how well we can like focus on one task. Any other ideas? Like what would be another good trait for like an L&D kind of fictional worker, or like a fictional ID? Communication skills. I mean, that's kind of like charisma, like how good you are like speaking to people, right? Design skills. Like visual design. Attention to detail. I like these. Oh, creativity. Okay, I like that one. That one's cool. Let's go with creativity. But a lot of good ones here. We're just gonna go with 3 to keep it simple. We can use the same process we're going to use here to like build out 10 different ones. We want this to look better. Obviously, this doesn't look very good, so we'll change the font. If we were building this out for real, we would kind of do a little style guide up front and say like, here are the colors we're using, here are the fonts we're using, here are the kind of sound effects we're using and all of that. But we'll just keep this consistent with my branding and these workshops. I just use this Futura font. So you probably don't have this by default on your computer, so you can just pick like your favorite font if you're following along. So we'll see how Futura PT Bold looks. So this is just the font I use on my website and like on all of these workshops. For those of you who are new, how I was like kind of duplicating it, I drag it and then I hold down the Control key on my keyboard. So when I let go, it makes a copy of whatever element it was that I was dragging. So we don't need that, so we can remove that. We'll also do some centering now. So I'm selecting one of these text boxes. I'm holding down the Shift key on my keyboard and selecting the other ones so that we can have them all selected at once. And then I'm going to go to the Format tab up here at the top, and we will select this align center option. Okay, so now we have things centered. This is looking a little bit better. Let's see here. I'm just gonna kind of bring these two down here. I'm just gonna bring them off the screen. Let's just focus on like one thing at a time here. Let's see how this looks all caps. Um, and we could probably make this a little bit smaller too. I don't know if we need a ton of detail on this or a ton of attention to that. I'm just playing around with these here. We want, the important thing is how many points we're assigning to each thing. So I'm gonna make a new text box here. And we're just gonna kind of mock up what this will look like. So we'll say we have like 10 total points available. We want this to be that same font. And we want this to be bigger. So let's see how this looks. Okay. I'm just, I keep going back and doing these alignment tasks. I'm trying to keep everything nice and centered on the screen. I could probably make all these text boxes center aligned too, just in case I like make it bigger or smaller. We want it to stay centered within the box. So we have 10 points available, and since we haven't assigned any of them yet, we would have like 0 points in charisma, for example. When we do these centering things, it's going to align whatever is like on the inside to whatever is on the outside. So notice charisma. If we look at the left side and the right side, charisma holds both of those positions, like the text box above. So if I press this align center button, it's going to align whatever is like in between those edges to the center. Okay, so you see it brings it right into alignment. We could probably bring it closer, since these are the points assigned to charisma. Maybe a little bit lower. It's looking good. And now we want some kind of interactive element so that we can add points and subtract points from this trait. Right, so I'm going to go to the Insert tab, and we're just going to use triangles for now. Okay? So I'm playing around with the sizing. Let's see. Do we want to keep this like nice and small, kind of aligned within here? Or do we want to make, no, that looks kind of off. Or do we want to make it kind of nice and big and aligned with like the whole kind of thing here? Because we'll have one on this side, one on that side. When we click on the right arrow, it will add a point to charisma. And when we click on the left arrow, it will remove a point from charisma. And we can do this with like a plus sign and a minus sign. Like maybe those would have been better visual indicators, like just a little plus right here and a minus right here. Do we prefer that? Might not be as big and easy to click, but we can see how that looks. We would make these, we can make these like that same black color. How did it pull blue from this? And again, I'm going kind of fast. I'm using the shape fill to kind of change what fill color these have. I used the eyedropper and it somehow pulled. Oh, it's because my overlay. It's because of this little hover overlay. So if we get rid of it, now we can make it black. Cool. Plus and minus sound great. Okay, let's see. Let's try that. So we will go to the Insert tab and we'll go to icons. I think we could probably use shapes too. Is there a plus sign in here? This is kind of like a plus sign or a cross, I guess. But let's just see if they have an icon for us. Okay, this one looks good. Let's just go with this nice and simple one. All right, so I'm gonna try. So I'm looking at alignment here, so we can maybe align it with the edges. Actually, we're not gonna want to align it with the text above because the text above won't be consistent. So we don't want like some of the plus signs being like aligned with this, and then the other plus signs being aligned with like the edge of scales. Like that will look weird if they're like all kind of jumping all over. So we'll just kind of have it nicely spaced away from the number in the center. And we also need to keep in mind that this number could reach 10. So let's make sure that, Okay. I don't know if this is going to be a problem, but we will wait and see. Equation shapes as a plus. Oh, good. Okay. So we didn't have to use icons here, but we're going to use it for now. Just recenter this. And now we will use the minus. We'll make a minus over here. We'll do insert shape, and we could just use a line. Here's equation shapes like Nicole pointed out. So let's use that. So notice that it has like a stroke around it and a fill. Like the stroke is like on the outside, the fill is in the center. So we want to get rid of that outline. So we'll go to the Format tab. We'll click on the drop down for Shape Outline and just do No Outline. And we want the fill to be the same color as these other elements. So with design, again, we really want to keep things consistent. So I want this bar to be the same kind of shape, like length and width as this bar in the center of the plus sign. Doesn't look like this is going to give us super fine control, but let's try bringing it over here and seeing how we look. So it looks like we just need to be a few pixels longer. So let's see, or wider. So I'm just going to change it manually using this width input box in the Format tab. And I think we can go with 29 probably. So see how I'm just trying to keep that bar consistent. Little things like that will just make the visual design look a bit better. Okay. How are we looking? All right, now I'm kind of jumping all over the place, but it should be good. Now, one thing about using icons, okay, thinking about user experience. When we make this interactive, we're going to want to make it so that when someone clicks on this, it adds one, and when someone clicks on this, it removes one. Now, the thing with icons and shapes in Storyline, this is with icons in particular, okay? So notice when we have this selected, it shows like this nice bounding rectangle around it. Now, if we were to add interactivity to this, so for example, when the user clicks on this icon, add one to this variable that's going to hold this data, it will only work if you click on the filled in area. Okay, so and back to the user experience piece, we want like a bigger kind of area for people to be able to select so that they don't have to like get their mouse exactly on this little bar. Like it would be a better user experience if you could just click anywhere in this general area and it still remove one from that variable. And same thing over here. We want to be able to click in these spaces in between and it still add one to the variable. And that might not seem like as big of a deal with this cross one, but if we're adding like, let's see, X width circle or something, or even some of the ones we just saw actually were good. So like plus, but like if we were to use this icon, you would think, oh yeah, let me just click in this circle and it will do the interaction. If you click on this part that isn't filled in, it's not going to do anything if you have the trigger assigned to an icon. So there are a few ways around that. So yeah, you could use a hotspot. You go to the insert tab, you use hotspot, and you click that and just kind of drag it over. And it looks green to us, right? It's like, oh, we don't want this to be in our project, but that's what hotspots are. They're like invisible interactive boxes, essentially. One thing about this, you can't control hotboxes or hotspots in the same way that you can control like transparent rectangles, okay? There are certain things you can and can't do to them, and maybe this was updated, but there are some projects I was working on where I'm like, okay, I need to switch out all of these hotspots with transparent rectangles because I can't do what I wanted to with the hotspot. So we can add accessibility text. Can we fade it out? We can, I mean, not that you were going to see the animation. Does anyone know what you cannot do with a hotspot, but what you can do with a transparent rectangle? I know there's something. We can add motion paths. States. Okay. Okay, so adding states. So I don't think we would need any states for this here. Oh, we can't make it go to a hidden state. Oh, exactly. Good points. Good points. Perfect. Yeah, that's exactly what I needed to do one time. Okay, good. So hidden states. So generally, I mean, hotspots are easier. Probably in 95% of cases, they'll get the job done, but let me just show, we'll just use transparent rectangles here. I mean, hotspots are nice too because you can see them so easily on your canvas when you're editing. So maybe we will use hotspots for this, but let me show you the alternative that's a little bit more like, um, it's harder for it to fail, kind of. So we would put a rectangle like this over our spot. We can get rid of the shape outline. So we'll go to format and then use the same approach to get rid of the outline. And then we can right click it, go to format shape and bring the transparency all the way up. So see, it's harder to work with in this like editor because it's like literally invisible to us. But now we can, if we put it into this hidden state, any interactions that we add to it will not be put into effect until we change the state of this shape to normal. So this is advanced stuff, right? Like if you've never used Storyline before, it's okay. Don't get too caught up on this. We'll use hotspots, but if you do know what we're talking about, these are generally safer to go with. But let's use hotspots just so we can see what we're working with here for this demo. All right, so we'll build a hotspot over this. So now this hotspot becomes like our clickable area, so to speak. Okay, so we're gonna have one hotspot over here on the right side to add to charisma, and one over there on the left to remove from charisma. So I think we're ready to add some interactivity to this. Now you notice now I have available points and charisma just like hard coded in. Okay, so when we click on this, nothing at all is going to happen. We need to hold some kind of variable data so that when people do interact with this screen, we can modify the data. Right? And that of course is where variables come into play. They hold data specific to a user session. Okay? So we will, over here in the top right, select manage project variables. This is how we get to like the variable manager. So we'll select that. And now we can create a new variable by pressing this green little plus icon here. All right, so we can choose a name for a variable, we can choose the type of variable, and there are only three types, either true or false. So this is like a Boolean variable. It can only hold two types of data. It's either true or it's false. This is good if you want to know if like a slide has been viewed or a scene has been completed or an animation has completed. Any of those things where it's just it either is true or it's false. That's it. Text, these are the most common kind of variables you will use, and then number variables. We can perform like mathematical operations on these, but they can't hold any kind of like letters, only numbers. So in our case, we're going to use numbers because we're just holding a number between 0 and 10, and we will name this one charisma. The default value will be 0, okay? And then also we need our available points because we want to make sure that when we're adding something to charisma, we need to also make sure that we don't still have 10 points available up here. So that needs to be a dynamic value also. So we will create a new variable and we will call this one total points. First, I'm using camel case here. This is like a JavaScript naming convention for variables. The first letter is lowercase and the first letter of each following word is capitalized. So there we have it. And it's important how you name your variables. You want to be descriptive, but we won't dive too deep into that here. So total points, the default value, notice, we want the default value here to be 10. Okay. We don't want to start that one as 0. We start with 10 points. We need to assign them to all of the different traits we have here. So we have our variables. I closed out of that screen. Now we need to actually display them here because these are just static text boxes. So the way we do that is with variable references. We can include a reference, and you do that just by using these percentage signs. So we'll create a variable reference, and this one will be total points. Okay, so it needs to be named kind of exactly how it's named in the variable manager. And there's another way we can do this. We can get rid of this. I'm just going to put a letter like placeholder there so it doesn't like delete my text box. We can go to the insert tab. We can go and we can click on this little reference button right here. Now it will show you a list of your variables and you can just double click on the one you want and it kind of just pastes in exactly what we had before. So it's kind of frustrating me how this box keeps like jumping around every time I change this. So what I'm going to try to do here is I'm going to try to just bring this text box to the full width of the screen. Okay, so, and since I have the text box centered, I centered the text itself, the text will always be perfectly aligned to the center of the text box, right? And it's not getting perfect. I know that this canvas is 1280 pixels because we set that up at the beginning, so I can just change the width here to 1280. And there we go. Now it's perfect. And the coordinates, if we want this to start at the perfect left edge of the screen, we can just set that X value to 0, and we know it will start flush left with the, flush left here. So that's how we can kind of use these like numbers up here to get this really precise control over what we're doing. And I'll probably do the same thing here. So notice I can just completely use the numbers. So the X coordinate, we want to be 0, and the width we want to be 1280. So there we go. And of course, with this one, we don't want it to hold 0. We want it to hold that charisma value. So I'm just going to type it with these percentage signs before and after the variable name. Capitalization matters here. So here we have it. So if we preview now, it should still say exactly what we had. It should say 10 and 0 because those are what the default values are for those variables. All right. Looks like our spacing got a little messed up here for some reason. So notice now it's harder to kind of modify the plus sign. What we can do is we can temporarily hide this text box. Make sure the spacing on the 0 between the plus and minus is correct. Yeah, that would be nice. It looked right when we just had it as a 0, but let's try something else. So I'm just going to move the hotspot out of the way. Sorry, my mouse is acting up a little bit. Come on. All right. So I'm going to group these two icons, okay? Because I want to align these with like the center of the slide. I want to make sure that because if these are perfectly centered with that space in between it, then ideally the 0 should be perfectly centered in between those. So I'm going to select them both. First, I select one, I hold down Shift and select the other. Now I'm going to press the Control G key on my keyboard to group them. So now see it like down here, it shows group 1. Like they're just being treated as a single object now. So now if I press this align center object, if you use these alignment keys with only one thing selected, and in this case, a group is being considered like a single object, then it will align it with the slide itself. So let's see how this shifts when I click this. And it doesn't shift at all. So these were perfectly centered. I think it's just it isn't putting that 0 in the spot we want it to, even though we have the text box like centered. Oh, it did shift slightly to the left. Okay. I didn't even notice, but let's see how it looks now. Okay, I think it does look a little better, maybe. I mean, I think we still have more white space between these two than we do between these. I don't think I want to get really held up on that right now, but generally we want to keep it nice and balanced and make sure the space between these two, between this and that icon is exactly the same as between this and that. But I think it's maybe close enough for now. Or maybe I'll just manually move this over a couple. Moved it over 3 pixels just manually. Let's see. Okay. Manual adjustment. There we go. I think once it gets to 10, it would be centered. Yeah, but it shouldn't need to be 2 digits to be centered because this one isn't tied to any amount of digits, right? We just have it set to 0. Oh, and Kevin is suggesting using shapes with no fills and no border rather than text boxes. More control with the shape and it'll be exactly the same size. Good suggestion, Kevin. Text boxes are wonky and they come with all of this like built-in padding and stuff. So that is a good safe suggestion. That's the next thing I need to do in my path to just like doing everything kind of a weird way in Storyline to avoid the default traits and programming they assign to things. But thank you for that suggestion. Let's make sure we get this hotspot line back up and let's make this interactive now. Let's get to the fun part. So can anyone say in plain English, maybe people who are newer to variables and conditions, like when we're doing programming things, it's always better to just describe what you want to happen in plain English before actually trying to do the programming. And yeah, good point, Kevin. Hacking Storyline is half the fun. You can program it perfectly, it all makes sense, then you test it and it just doesn't work. So it's like, let me just start going through the list of other ways we can accomplish this now until it does what we want it to do. So there's always multiple ways to do things here in Storyline, and in some cases you'll have to kind of exhaust that list until you get it to work. um, but yeah, so what do we want to happen when we press this plus button? Can anyone tell us? There's two things we want to happen. Plain English, what's the goal here? Okay, add points to charisma and -1 on total points. Yeah, exactly. So add 1 point to charisma and subtract 1 from total points. Exactly. When we can word it in plain English like that and be really specific and detailed about what we want, we can translate that really, really well into creating an actual trigger. So check this out. So I selected this hotspot. So now I know when I create my trigger by selecting this little create new trigger icon over here on the right, it will default fill in like we're going to do some sort of action when the user clicks hotspot 1. Okay, so sometimes it's good just to select the object you want to add a trigger to before actually clicking the create new trigger button so that you don't have to kind of go through everything on your slide to find the shape or object you're looking for. So just a little trick, if you are brand new to Storyline, triggers are how we add all of the interactivity to our projects. So this is where Storyline maybe starts to become different than PowerPoint, is because we can make it, when we click on the screen, we're not just jumping to the next slide, we can make different, very specific things happen here. Okay? So action, that's where we actually decide what's going to happen. And if you are new to Storyline, study this list, check out Storyline's documentation, just so that you know about the different things that are possible when the user takes some sort of action. But see, you can jump to slides, jump to scenes, do all sorts of things. But what we're interested right now is this adjust variable trigger. So that's how we can change variables values based on user input. And you'll notice we get some different options here. So by default, it wants us to set a value to something, but we don't want to do that. We don't want to, if we were to set charisma to 1, for example, then every single time we click on this plus button, it's just going to make charisma equal to 1. So we want to make sure we're using a different operator. We want to add. So we want to add value. You could also add variables to variables and add random numbers to numbers. But we just want to add the value 1, right? We're keeping it nice and simple here. Add 1 to charisma when the user clicks hotspot 1. So that's perfect. And yeah, Elise, Storyline, like the final output is going to be like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So it's essentially just like a visual way to modify what will eventually be JavaScript. Yes. Okay, so but that will happen when we publish this thing. Okay, so we want to add 1 to charisma, and a quick way, since we already have this kind of set up, we already have the adjust variable action. We already have it when the user clicks this button. What we can do instead of trying to like create a new trigger from scratch is we can just copy and paste this trigger. So I'm going to press copy, and since I already have this hotspot selected, I can just paste it. And see, now we have 2 of the exact same thing. I'm going to double click on this one, and we're going to just make this for the subtracting 1 from the total points variable. So we're going to adjust a variable. We're not going to add value 1. We're going to subtract value 1 from not charisma, but total points. Okay, when the user clicks hotspot 1. And good suggestion from Sharon about naming everything. So good, cool suggestion about with a hotspot, like adding like what it is, like abbreviations. So like HS_+. So let's do that. So I'm just going to press OK here because this should work now. But notice it's like when the user clicks hotspot 1, that's not very good practice because when another developer picks this up, they're going to have to be like, okay, what's hotspot 1? Like it's just going to make this harder to understand for other people and for us if we look back at it even a week later. So to name these things, we can just double click on their name down here in the timeline. So notice this says hotspot 1 down here. I'm just going to double click it. And we will use Sharon's naming principle. So HS for hotspot underscore plus sign. Let's go with that. Thank you, Sharon. Well, another way we could do this is like charisma plus sign because we're gonna have multiple plus signs here. So let's do like hotspot There are multiple. Add one to charisma. Um, add to charisma. So we'll just do that. There are obviously different ways we can do it, but we want to be clear about what we're doing. Cool. Glad to hear that this is a common practice, adding that HS abbreviation here. Good suggestions in the chat. Thank you. Keep them coming. But okay, so this should work now. So let's just test this and see our work. I need to make sure I unhide this text box so that it will actually appear. And let's see how we did. All right, so we want to just make our person super charismatic. So there we go. So when we click on this, and notice we don't have to click on the exact line. We can click anywhere on this hotspot. Even right here, we'll still get the job done. So we can just keep racking it up. Now, we're about to run into a problem. Does anyone know what problem we're going to run into? Yeah, Brian pointed it out. Now we need limits. Because watch what's going to happen. If we keep adding, okay, we have no more points, but let's just say we want to kind of break the game here. I want my charisma to be at like 99. Okay, now we're just running a debt on our points here. But we can just like keep it going because we don't have any limits here. All right, so we need to fix that before we start duplicating this programming. So I'm going to hide the text box. And this is where conditions come into play, okay? So we want to, so can anyone tell me in plain English, how are we going to add a condition to this? We want both of these things to happen when something is true, okay? And some of you will know this instantly. Maybe people who are newer to variables and conditions, see if you can answer this. We only want to add 1 to charisma and subtract 1 from total points when someone clicks this if what is true? If total points is less than or equal to 10. Exactly. Because if we have 0 points up here, we don't want these triggers to fire because it's just going to bring us into the negative. So that's how we kind of limit this. So I'm going to double click on one of these to open back up the trigger wizard here. And this is where this optional conditions field comes into play. So we just need to do exactly what Bill here suggested. We will only do this if total points is not equal to, but is less than or equal to 10. Oh, wait, sorry. No. Have I just been confusing us? If total points is greater than or equal to 0. I'm sorry, Bill. It was a good guess. I was with you there for a minute, but we only want it to happen if we have points available. Okay, and some of you might have caught that. Yes, exactly, Lise. If it's greater than or equal to 0. Oh, and then Brian suggested not equal to 0. Yeah, that's another way to do it. If it's not equal to 0, then it's never going to get... If we don't do these things when it's equal to 0, then it will never get below 0. So good suggestion, Brian. That logic would work just as well. But we'll just leave it as this, but we could also do not equal to 0. So good suggestion. Because, yeah, it can't be equal to 0 or it's going to get below 0. It's going to go to -1. So this is what we need, right? Because if it's equal to 0 and we press it, then it's going to go to -1 and then it will stop working. So we only want to do this if total points is greater than 0, because that means we have at least 1 point available. All right. So this will get the job done. So we need to add this to the other trigger here. So we only want to do this one if total points is, and we'll do this one is not equal to 0 just to show that they both will work here. Okay. So if this is equal to anything above 0, it will work. Once it gets to 0, it will just stop firing. So it will never get below 0. All right, so let's unhide this and let's see if our limit works now. Okay, so here we go. We're adding points. I want to break the system, but I can't because it just stops working now. So there we go. I can click it as much as I want, but it's putting that hard limit on both of those triggers. The condition is no longer met because this is equal to 0, which means that it's not greater than 0. So both of those conditions are not being met, and this is just going to stop working. All right. So I think we need to just make it work the other way around now. We need to make it work when we're subtracting things, and then we can add in a couple of other traits and see this thing in its full glory. So I'm just going to drag this one. I'm going to hold down the control key and try to drop it right over the minus sign because I already have this kind of programming set up. It should be easier to change. I just need to kind of invert it now. So this time we want to subtract 1 from charisma when the user clicks this. And in this case, we're not really so concerned if total points is more than 0, right? Because we're going to be adding to total points. So we're not going to be taking away from total points. So what limit do we need on the subtraction? So we only want to subtract if charisma is, because we don't want to let charisma go negative. So we just need to make sure that charisma is greater than 0, right? So not if total points is greater than 0, but in this case, we want charisma to be greater than 0. Because if we don't have something here, if this is at 0, we can't subtract anything from it further. Okay, so we'll press OK there. And then same thing for this next one. Let's add value to 1, or sorry, add value 1 to total points when the user clicks this if charisma is not equal to 0. All right, so that should be all we needed there. Let's just make sure. And notice, like, we're very intentionally just building out one of these things first. Like, first, we're just making sure the plus sign works with the limits. Once it does, we can just copy over the hotspot, make some minor adjustments, and then we want to see if that works. And once we know that works, that's when we can duplicate it out to the other traits. So right off the bat, let's try subtracting here and going below. I cannot do that. So let's try to go up above. Okay, we use up all of our points and back down. Uh-oh, so something happened here. So this is why it's good to test. So when we're going from 1 to 0, it doesn't give us a point back. So we need to troubleshoot that trigger. So where we're adding value 1 to total points if charisma is not equal to 0. So this comes up in every storyline workshop we do. This is so important. Can someone tell me what's happening here? Why is this breaking? Look at this trigger, okay? So we want to add value to 1 when the user clicks this if charisma is not equal to 0. So it's equal to 1 when we click it, so it should be adding 1 to total points, right? Lori already mentioned it. Does anyone else want to elaborate on Lori's hint that she gave us here about order? And Gia suggested not doing if charisma is not equal to 0, but if total points is not equal to 10. Gia, the reason we wouldn't want to do that is because we're going to have other traits here. Remember, we're going to have technical skills and creativity. So we might have points assigned here. So that still wouldn't be 10, but it would let us get below 0. Okay, so Jay explained it fully. So add value to total points needs to happen first before subtracting from charisma, right? And again, if you're new, this may be confusing, but watch this back. This is so important. So here's this hotspot. So notice what's happening. Trigger order matters, right? If we look over here. So what we're doing is first, we're subtracting 1 from charisma as long as charisma is greater than 0. So charisma is 1. The first thing that will happen is it will say, yes, charisma is greater than 0. So let's subtract 1 from it. Now charisma is 0. Then it will go on and try to fire the second trigger. Okay, now let's add 1 to total points only if charisma is not equal to 0. Too bad it is equal to 0 because we just subtracted 1 from it. So we cannot fire this code or this trigger. So the way to resolve this, all we have to do is we have to make sure that we're adding 1 to total points first before we're subtracting 1 from charisma. And we can do that just by using this little button right here to move that selected trigger up. Okay, so if we preview this now, that should solve everything. Again, what was happening is it was subtracting 1 from charisma in the first trigger, making it equal to 0. And then the second one wasn't firing because charisma was equal to 0. So here we go. And this just proves my point of why we test these things before duplicating it across all of them. So there we go. So now it gets to 1. The first thing it will do when I press this minus sign is it will add 1 to this, and then it will subtract 1 from this. Perfect. All right. So there we have it. Something that if you're not aware of this, like you'll spend hours troubleshooting your project and it will just be the order of triggers that's the problem. So this can be really frustrated when you're like this programming should work. What is going on here? So there we go. So now that this works perfectly, we need to just duplicate it across um the other traits we have here. So first I want to make sure I have a variable for each of them. So we will create a new variable. This one will be called tech skills. We'll make it a number variable equal to 0 by default. And the other one we have is creativity. And that will also be equal to 0 by default as a number variable. And yeah, if you got lost at that point, try to watch it back. The people some people like learn Storyline by like watching these back and trying to rebuild it and just like pausing these videos like every 30 seconds to catch up. But yeah, you're going to be getting into some pretty advanced stuff if you're doing this like to learn Storyline. So good luck to you. And yeah, reach out if you have any further questions as you're going through the replay, or drop a YouTube comment. But okay, so what I want to do now, since we already worked out all of this programming, I like saving time. I don't want to build all of these triggers from scratch. I just want to make little, slight, easy changes. So what I want to do is I want to use my favorite little shortcut here. I want to select all of these things, and I want to do my good old drag and drop with the control key selected. So I'm just going to drag it down. I have control selected on my keyboard, so when I let go, it makes a copy of each of those elements. And I got a little sloppy. I forgot I should click on this subtract one right here. Notice the name right here now is like HS underscore add to charisma space 1. That's what Storyline will do. It will just like add numbers as you make copies if you don't change the name. So I want to make this HS underscore subtract from charisma. Okay. There we go. We renamed that one. This one will be technical skills. I want to use the same kind of little approach here where I make the x equal to 0, the x coordinate, and the width equal to 1280. And we can rename these things. I'm not going to do it right now because I notice we have about 10 minutes left. I just want to get it functional. But ideally, each time you make one of these copies, you'll rename the different elements on the timeline so that you can keep things nice and organized. So this one, instead of it saying charisma, we want it to say tech skills. That's exactly what I named the variable. Right, and now the only other thing is the programming. Okay, so if we click on this plus sign hotspot over here, and I actually just realized I probably left behind the icons. Yeah, I did. So I'm just gonna hide some things off the screen here so I can get access to these icons. I'm gonna select both of them. I'm just gonna drag these down to be nice and centered in these hotspots, and then I'm just gonna let go with the control key so that there's a copy. Notice now if we scroll in here, I know it's starting to look a little confusing, but these are above the hotspot. So if I go in here and I try to click this plus sign, since we have the interactivity added to the hotspot, this plus sign is kind of like blocking the interactivity now. So now if these are above the hotspot and I click on this, nothing's going to happen. So I like have to click off of it. We don't want that to happen. So I'm just going to click on the hotspot, right click it, and click on bring to front. Because it's kind of like if you've ever used like Adobe products, like the layering is important here too. The other way you can go about this is by dragging these things up to the top in the timeline. So again, just like this, because I copied these in later, they went to the top of the stack. What I can do is down here, I can either click on the hotspot and drag it to the top, or I can even click on this minus sign and drag it down. And notice how you can even tell visually that it's getting covered and uncovered. So we want them to be covered by those hotspots. And if you've been like hiding a lot of different things like I have and you want to quickly show them all, you can just click on this eye right up here at the top, show/hide all. So first it will hide everything, and then I click it again and it will show everything. I've also been having like a big no-no here. I haven't saved my project once. Big mistake in Storyline, so let's make sure we save this. Generally we'll want to save like every 15 minutes or like sooner if you can. But let's name this, I'll just name it RPG, even though it is the very beginning of an RPG and we didn't even set any context or anything. It is what it is. I have some polls for you all too, so please hang around. This is just about done. We just need to fix up these hotspots. Okay, so I don't want to add value 1 to charisma when this happens. I want to add 1 to tech skills. Subtract 1 from total points. Yep, that one looks good. Now let's look at the subtraction one. I don't want to add 1 to value total points if charisma is not equal to 0, but if tech skills is not equal to 0. Subtract 1 from tech skills if tech skills is greater than 0. So notice how easy it is to duplicate this. Now we're literally just copying and pasting. I do need to select all of these elements again, and we need to make, and this time I did it on the timeline to make sure I could get those icons. So I just click on the top one. I look to where that ends. This is the last thing for tech skills. I'm going to hold down the shift key on my keyboard and click on this, and it will select everything in between those two. So once again, I'm just going to drag this down and drop it. Trying to get the spacing between them consistent. There are ways to get this like mathematically perfect, but I'm just trying to play it by eye for now. This one is creativity. And we just need to swap it out as the actual variable. We will make this creativity. There we go. And now the hotspots. We don't want to add 1 to tech skills. We want to add 1 to creativity. Again, we're literally just swapping out the variables when we do this copying and pasting. And this is just about complete. So let's preview it, or let's save it, and then we'll preview it and see if this works. Brian asked if I've had problems with storyline crashing a lot and losing saves. I wouldn't say like a lot, but it has definitely happened. And it is no fun when it happens. Okay, so the centering seems a little off here. I know this isn't what we like super important. Let me just see if this fixes it. This kind of stuff bugs me a lot. It will grow to bug you too, but it looks good enough. So let's see here. So let's say we want to be like pretty charismatic. We're gonna go like the networking approach. That's how we're gonna make our way to chief learning officer in this RPG. Let's be creative, and there we go. We can't add anything else. We can't subtract anything here. If we subtract 1 here, we can add something here. Yeah. So it looks like it's perfect. We can bring everything back down to 0. We can try to be, we're just going to be like a technical wizard. We're going to have no charisma, no creativity. We're just going to churn out storyline courses all day. Maybe we want to do that. Yeah, but this works. So it's all locked down, and there we have it. We built it out. So do you want me to share this file with you all? I can kind of add this file to the webinar if this would be helpful. All right, I'll make sure I get that file saved. Let me stop sharing my screen. I have a couple of questions for you all, though, before we do this. I mean, I know if you made it this far, you're probably somewhat interested in this RPG concept. Like, there are a couple of other interactions we could build out, kind of like an interactive, like, organizational map. We could build, like, an ability bar. Like, as we progress, it's like you've unlocked, like, the needs assessment skill, or you've unlocked, like, user interviews and, like, things like that. There are cool other little interactions we can build on this like RPG theme, but realistically, a client probably isn't going to hire you to like build an RPG for them in Storyline. It's not the best tool for the job. So I have a couple of polls for you. So the first one here is, I guess, would you like me to continue this RPG series? But the other one is like, if we had more options, which sessions would you prefer? Okay. And here are the ideas, because I'm going to do a lot of storyline content. Like I have a storyline fundamentals course I'm going to be working on. I love the storyline stuff. So here are the session options. Okay. This RPG series, we can continue. We can continue piecing it together. Maybe we'll even have like some storytelling sessions where we kind of like make it into a whole experience and we just build it as we go, week by week or whatever. We could do storyline clinics, okay? So where people like submit their projects where they're struggling, or maybe there's a certain concept you're struggling with. You kind of submit a storyline file, and then when we go live, we'll kind of go through those together, troubleshoot them as like maybe a community, and see how to fix these common problems. Storyline basics series. So this would be for the beginners out there. Again, these workshops particularly aren't like super targeted to beginners. Like we try to cover some beginner stuff, but generally not using variables and conditions on day one. So this would be like a session on like triggers, a session on states, a session on the interface. We could do that. Or storyline rebuilds. So this is a concept I thought was cool too. If we see like a cool e-learning interaction, or if there's like a cool like kind of calculator or just like web experience overall, we try to recreate it in storyline and see, okay, here's how we can pull assets from this. Here's how we can see what font they're using. Here's how we can simulate this interactivity in storyline. Maybe we'll even get into needing to use like some JavaScript and stuff like that. So those are the options for that second poll here. So most of us want to continue the RPG series, but it looks like if we have all of our options open to us, those storyline rebuilds are pretty high up there. Okay, I might call on some help from you all, either in the Slack community or on my email list or whatever. Like if there are specific storyline or specific web interactions you think of, or or like e-learning experiences that were built by like a big team with like a big budget. Maybe some suggestions would be helpful too, because I'm sure I could find some things, but I know you all have stumbled across some cool projects. So good stuff. And then good to see that the second place one is this RPG series, because I have my personal interest in that. So thanks for hanging out here. I want to share that file with you all. I'm gonna share a call to action while I get this file uploaded, just to join the Slack community. That's where a lot of us do like networking and problem solving in between these sessions. So most of us are probably in there already, but if you're not, I just shared a link that will bring you directly into it. Let me just upload this file for you all as well. And we're finishing up this one just on time, it seems. So good stuff. Just uploading this file. Okay, and I just shared the storyline file if you want to have that as kind of like a way to help you troubleshoot if you're trying to build this yourself. And if you do build it yourself, I will extend that challenge too. If you are going to try to build this yourself, maybe use some different traits, or you add a little bit of context around it, you want to build it out a little bit further, please share that with us in the Slack community. There's a webinars channel where I shared this webinar. Feel free to just share it in there, or on like the feedback channel. We'd love to see what you do with this concept. And maybe it will even inspire us for like where we're going to take these future sessions. Well, good stuff, everyone. Thanks for hanging out here with me until the end. I love the storyline sessions, so I appreciate you all showing up here. It was fun, and I will see you all next time. So thank you, and bye-bye for now.